you know what I mean. Hi, everybody. It's Andra Annette. I want to welcome one of my guests today. Nicky Cooper is with me. She's a nurse like myself, and we have very similar backgrounds. We both started very, very young, and we're still out there helping. So you have to absolutely love what you do. But I met Nicky recently because we were talking about collaborating on something else. And I just love who she is as a person and what she's doing now. And we were talking a lot about children and dysregulation and what's going on since COVID and how we can really try to get them back in those bodies and be productive in the future, because it doesn't look good. Everybody's very dysregulated since COVID still. I know it was a while ago, but a lot of people are still feeling very traumatized by that situation. So we want to just share a little insight about what we're seeing, even in the children, and hope that this helps someone out there. A lot of doctors are giving children diagnoses of ADHD a lot these days, and autism and things like that. And we really want to encourage you to advocate for your children and really find out at the root what's going on. Okay, so here's Nicky Cooper. So I want you to tell me a little bit about what you're doing now. You have an extensive history in nursing. And the one thing I love about nursing, Nicky, is that you can really move in and out of anything. If you want change, you can really gravitate towards something else. There was many times in my life that I was experiencing different things and wanted something different in nursing, and was be able to segue, which is something that you are doing, and you're rocking it out there. You're like the single person out where you live, really working on what you're working on. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so Curia from New Zealand to start with, but I am currently working in public health, and I have undertaken a program to support early childhood educators in really having an in-depth understanding about attachment and emotional regulation and competence, etc. And that's part of my role in First 1,000 Days, which I think has now morphed into First 2,000 Days, and possibly heading towards the First 3,000 Days, which would be awesome. And our belief is that we are supporting whoever's engaged with families. They don't really need another car down the driveway to unpack what's going on in their lives and their history, but they do need to have some support. And some of the people that may be engaged may not have all of those resources. So we have a team of professionals, from pediatricians to psychologists, etc., and we're trying to support those who've already got engagement with those families. So I've chosen to support families as well as early childhood educators, and I'm running a 2-hour professional development program for them on attachment and emotional regulation, etc., and self-regulation. So yeah, it's been I did last night. I delivered my 31st course since February, and it's really challenging out there. Certainly here in New Zealand, we had a late addition to the party of COVID. It didn't come here until quite late, and we've certainly seen what I'm trying not to label, but pandemic babies of what are the children that are going into early childhood centres at the moment certainly seem to be having quite a lot of struggles with self-regulation. And very probably because of the fact that they were isolated and there were lockdowns and they had masked communication, and we know that that really impacts speech and development, but also how they learn about their world. So yeah, it's been a very interesting project so far, Andra. It's what I'm hearing back from these centres is that this is something that they've never experienced before.
Wow. So when you say that you support the families, in our discussion for the Fenix TV, you were telling me that a lot of the parents are going through this too, which makes it harder because they're at school or in these early development centers for part of the day, and the people there, it's not that they don't want to help, they might not necessarily have the tools to help. So then they're leaving a place where they feel like kind of frustrated because they don't know what to really do with these children. And then they're going home and the parents are still dysregulated. A lot of them were dealing with a loss of a job or loss of a loved one, and that confinement and being home with the child all day long, on top of trying to work and do so many other things in their personal life. So the family also needs that support. I think it's great that someone's out there helping those children. So how do you really step in and say, okay, this is how we're going to support them? What does that look like? Can you draw that picture for me?
Oh gosh, it's a it's a complex beast, that's for sure. I mean, it's so multidimensional because for a lot of parents, I think parents is a lot. I think parenting is a lot harder than it used to be. I think that women particularly are having children later in life, and I think that if you go back 50, 60 years ago, I mean, particularly I'm British, but I've lived in here for 20 years. But here in New Zealand, it was very much a rural agricultural country. A lot of young girls would grow up through families becoming very domesticated because that was the expected norm for girls, and then they would get married young and have families, whereas these days most women are having professions and education, and they have a disposable income, they have a level of independence, and so there's a huge shift in their identity. I think that's one very big part of what's going on. I think that when they become a parent, that is, it's quite a hard thing for them to emotionally unpack because there's such a shift in who they are. I think that's one aspect of it. I think that in our modern society, where we've got a lot of things that are very convenient for life, at the same time, most families have to have two parents that are working, and so there is that expectation for that, and there is that need for that financially. There's a lot of stress on families to do that, so they have to rely on childcare or early childhood centres, etc. And some of these children are going there from 7:30 in the morning, perhaps even earlier in some places, till 5:30 in the evening. So that's a substantial amount of time that those children are away from their primary caregivers. That's causing a huge amount of parental guilt for particularly mothers. And I think that they've kind of run out of steam by the time they go home. They've given so much to their work. There's not very much left for this dysregulated child that has had to try and self-regulate away from their primary caregivers the whole day. So, it's that kind of scenario when your child comes home from school and you ask them what their day is, and then they have this emotional outburst. It's because you're their safe person. So of course, if you've got an empty tank and run out of spoons because you've been at work all day and given everything that you've got, there's very little left for those little people. And so I think on both sides, I think there's huge pressure on families now because of that expectation for both parents to work.
I like that. You've run out of spoons. I've never heard that expression. I've never heard that expression. So I know that a lot of doctors are, they've never seen anything like this either. It's put us in a situation that we've never experienced in history before. And a lot of children they're still learning how to deal with those emotions, and they really don't understand a lot of what they're feeling. So it is coming out in behaviors and in other ways, which is only understandable because they're trying to get someone's attention because they just don't know how to say what it is they're feeling. So the doctors are kind of putting them on medications for the ADHD or classifying it as something else. What would you like to see done? Myself personally, I think they need more of these early developments where there's actually skilled people working on them and really finding out what those emotions are and helping them work through it. So they can move on and progress to children that are productive and happy and joyful. Because when I think of children, I think of joy and unfiltered happiness and laughter. And I'm not seeing that in today's children either. And I think I've seen a lot. I also work in public health. I also do a lot of community nursing. And I'm seeing a lot more children with depression and anxiety than I've ever seen. And I don't know if it was always there and this brought it out because they had to be in the confinement, or it's a side effect of what everything that transpired and not being able to verbalize. Because children also, even the little ones, the wee ones, they look forward to spending time with their peers and laughing and having fun. And if something's not okay, they do confide in them. Even at the smallest age, they do know how to communicate to one another. So not having that and not being able to voice anything really stymied their emotional development in so many ways. So what can we do to really help the future of these children, to help them come out of that? What are we looking at?
Well, anyone that does policies is not going to like what I'm about to say, but you really need to go back to the beginning of life, and that's supporting the parents right at the beginning of life, because that's where it all starts. That's where attachment starts, in that first 3 months. And if we are not equipping parents to be able to have a nurturing attachment in that first 3 months of life, whatever goes on after that, it really is impacted by that level of resilience that they get. They're not attention seeking, they're connection seeking. They're looking for an attachment, which is intrinsic and biologic, and they're born with this knowing. And the way that the world has evolved with our modern ways of life and the fact that we're having to work, there are so many reasons why that attachment is not nurturing those children's emotional needs. And as a direct consequence of that, we are seeing some very maladaptive behaviors in children, because what they're, we know that behavior is a communicating a need always. If what they're communicating is not getting through and they're not getting those needs met, they will change that behavior. If their caregivers are triggered, if you want to use that word, or they're uncomfortable or confronted by some of those very intense emotional outbursts that are normal and they're healthy, and children have them, and they need help to co-regulate. If that's causing a level of stress response in a caregiver because of whatever sensory past experiences, the way that they were parented, run out of steam, etc., that does have that child is going to change that behavior to adapt to that. They're going to tune in and know that caregiver's not managing that feeling, so they're going to find another way of discharging that high emotion. I've been working with the Circle of Security for 6 years, which I think is a really, really good model to use. It's pretty much a psychology tool, and it looks at real core emotions and core emotional regulation and attachment. And it's a really, really easy way to explain it. I believe I'm the only one in New Zealand that's done the education level of it, which is why I'm trying to adapt it and use it for educators, because really predominantly they are the main attachment figures for some of these children when they're there 7:30 till 5:30, Monday to Friday. So I think we have to go right back to the beginning. I think we really have to re-look at why we're not supporting parents. And I think if you look at the long-term trajectory of long-term health outcomes, if we don't sort this out, it's not going to get any better. It's just going to get worse. We are going to have to depend on more conveniences in our life, and that's eating and exercise modification or sedentary lifestyles, etc. Whatever you want to look at, we are going to be seeing this is going to get worse and worse, and I don't think we're winning in this, unfortunately. So yeah,
I happen to agree with you wholeheartedly. I'm also concerned too, because you said emotional attachments or emotional needs that the parents may not have had met themselves, and maybe probably hadn't had a chance to process.
No.
So, and then along comes this baby and they don't know, okay, how am I going to raise this child? Because I don't care who you are. Anybody that holds that baby for the first time wonders, will I be able to do a good job with this child? You know what I mean? You have another life in your hands. But based on the past and their history and the traumas they may have faced in early childhood development, and maybe basic needs that weren't met for them, they often wonder if they can provide for their child. But maybe there's also a disconnect or detachment from their child out of fear base or whatever. So I agree. I'd like to see the parents supported, but before the birth.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, well, how are they taking that pregnancy? Is this something that's they were looking forward to? And are there things that they need to have met now so that they can go into this feeling confident in their skills as a mother, and to really give that child the tools that it needs, because we are what we're taught.
Yeah, infant mental health is one of those conversations that I have had with so many professionals as well as lay people, and they've gone, but infants don't have mental health. Yes, they do. And you've got to remember that that our ancestors and way back when, and all that epigenetics and stuff, we know more about brain development and attachment needs and emotional needs and how we regulate with our nervous system now. We know more about that now than they ever did. So, to a certain degree, they could only do what they knew, which for some parents, they may have had some of their emotions not supported, or even distracted from actually feeling what they were feeling. So for me, and this is how I see it, and this is how I explain it to parents and educators, is it's like they have a normal, healthy core emotion, sadness, anger, even shame, and it's like a tidal wave that comes up in front of them. So they always have that fear and that stress response, because it is an impending doom feeling when that happens. But if they have never been allowed, if someone has struggled to hold space for them, to allow them to co-regulate, they never get that experience of that water then just dropping on their head and dissipating out to the sea. They always have that tidal wave come up with that fear factor. So they then wire, because we know that repetition causes those neural pathways, that they always have that intense feeling, but they never get to the end point. So they're always going to have that stress response. And so when they have children, when those children evoke those high intense emotions, and of course they're very cyclonic in their nature and very snotty, etc., that intensity will then evoke that same stress response in that parent that they had when they were a child, which they never got to learn to know how to regulate that feeling. So they will instantly go to their stress response. And we know that parenting is hard. It's one of the hardest jobs on the planet. And when you have stress, you are not in your conscious brain. You are not cognitive and rational. You are drawing on what is those pre-verbal behaviors and learnings that you've developed, and they're your sort of autopilot behaviors. So it's a tricky beast, and I just think we have to go right upstream and really help at the beginning of life. We need to help a pregnant woman and an expectant father to start to bond with that baby whilst they're in utero. We need to look at what is the awake cycle, the sleep cycle of this fetus. Let's respect it. Let's have a communication. Let's start that attachment, because it's the start of life, and that's when it needs to start. And I honestly believe that it seems like such a simple fix, but for some reason it's the most expensive. But it really is the very beginning of life. And if we can just get that right, I honestly think we could change this. It's almost like the big ball that's coming down in Raiders of the Lost Ark. You can't get away from it. It's just getting worse and worse. And there's nowhere to run to. And so we're just getting faster and faster. And I really think we have to go back to basics, which is attachment.
So let's move forward a few years. We know, because we interact with them on a day-to-day basis, of what goes on when an adult who's very dysregulated. So the Fenix Show that I'm doing is about bringing the mental, the physical, the emotional all back into the body where it belongs. My thing is about healing from the inside out, because and what I mean by that, and people might perceive it very different, is that those traumas, everything starts in the mind. A lot of people, the traumas do, like people think weight loss or physical injuries are occurring in the body, but they're not. A lot of them start in the mind. Those fears, those limiting beliefs, all those things that people have been negating as we've been trying to grow and become our own individuals, people have been stuffing down. And because people don't have that voice, or they haven't found that voice yet, it's causing illness. So
Yeah.
what do you think that we could do? Because it's one thing to start healing people now that are going into pregnancy and stuff like that, but there are so many of these people that didn't get that. So how do we heal as a society? Do you have any input in that? Because I would really love to work with you on this, because I think this is gotten so out of hands. And I think there's a lot of people out there that feel like they're not good enough, or nobody, what's wrong with me? I'm the only one that feels this way, why do bad things happen to me? All these things, because that's the scenario they keep seeing, and they will keep seeing it until they deal with that stuff. So I think that a lot of people's growth have been stunted by those beliefs, and that they're really not living the full life that we're all here to live.
Yeah. Yeah. They're running a script that they're running a script that it's controlling so much of that aspect of, and I think to a certain degree it gives them some blind spots in their mindset. I guess that's one way of looking at it, that they're not actually able to see things because they're constantly running this script. So no matter what happens, when you're asking yourself the question, why does this keep happening to me, you're not asking the right question, for one thing, because you're not actually going, what is it that I need to look at deeply? and actually and it feels uncomfortable, because it is going to be an inner child thing, because it is going to be about an attachment that there was a lack of nurturing for whatever reason, without resentment or blame. But because of that tidal wave that comes up, it feels really uncomfortable. And I know that all of these core emotions can't kill you. I've never seen a feeling as the cause of death. I've seen the stress response prolifically and chronically, like you have, as the cause of death for causing illness. But the actual feelings can't. But one of those things is because we maybe, for some whatever reason, didn't have those emotional needs. We didn't learn how to regulate them at a very, very young age, particularly pre-verbal, that we're too afraid to go that deep because it's uncomfortable and it's painful. But actually, that's where all that learning is. And it's really about healing and restoring and dissolving or resolving some of those unmet needs and meeting them, and actually learning how to regulate those feelings would do amazing things, because then we wouldn't need to run that script of, why is this happening to me? It keeps happening because we're not doing the work that we need to do. That's the bottom line.
We
because
gotta give
it's so uncomfortable, and it's so painful, and it's so frightening, because we only ever learned that emotion was frightening. We never learned. No, I'm pretty sure everyone on the planet has cried themselves to sleep at some stage in their lives, but you didn't cry for 8 hours. At some point, usually 45 to 90 seconds, that intense emotion, you went, you stopped. You had a physiological change. And if we don't allow ourselves and those inner children to go back and revisit that, and actually allow ourselves to learn how to regulate that feeling when it is really intense, and it does feel like it's going to kill us because it's awful, we have a perceived threat of safety because that's how we were biologically made. If we don't address that, we're going to constantly run this script. And this like I do. I've known so many people at the end of their lives that are still holding on to stuff that they should really have let go of and
Absolutely.
processed and resolved and dissolved. There's always a gain and a loss. If you only focus on the loss, you're not going to see what you gained from that. And what you gained from that was potentially a real insight into something and a learning and a growth. But our brains, with that negative bias, we tend to focus on the negative. And so why does this keep happening to me? Because we're not listening. I think that's the bottom line.
Do you think that I had to do a lot of inner work because I found myself in those same circles and history repeating itself in the people that were surrounding me in my life, my choices in relationships and bad decisions I kept making. And I know that it wasn't easy, but it was necessary. So, and I don't know that I was ready for someone to hold space for me, but I did allow myself to hold that space for myself and to walk through that. And I really journaled a lot and got really down into what was bothering me. Like I was talking to someone today and we were talking about energies and how when it's not aligned, like when people are making you uncomfortable because it's against your core values, that you know what I mean? So you'll always get that uneasiness because it doesn't align with who you are at your core. So sometimes people can push my buttons more than others. But I understand now that, you know, everybody's different, but it's because something they're doing doesn't align with me. And I have to give it that space to see why it's bringing that up in me. You know, is it something they're doing or the way my response in it? It's not easy all the time because we do respond, but I find that because of the age that we're in, where everything is so quick, that people don't want to look at something and invest that time in themselves because they believe that they can have results momentarily and not have to do that work. So, and we spend a lot of time on devices instead of involved in meaningful relationships and making those connections in person, which I think is further causing a lot of dysregulation in all of us. It's causing a lot more stress because there's so many different things coming at us. You know what I mean? It's very busy environment all the time. Where do you look? Where do you look? You know? So what are your thoughts of that?
Well, I think instant gratification as opposed to delayed gratification is a stress response, and probably a trauma response. You're trying to fix something without you know, waiting it out and actually sitting with that feeling and acknowledging it and trying to understand it and unpack it. I think you're right. I think there's a lot of people that don't want to revisit stuff. I don't think you have to revisit trauma to a traumatic level, but I think you do need to process and resolve whatever it is that's going on with you. I was interested and listening to you talking about how some people will do things that certainly push your buttons and because it's against your core values. There's also a possibility that it's directly as a result of there's something in you that is unresolved. There is something in you that still needs tapping into for that learning. And the reason that you're noticing it is because of that. So, and I have a suspicion that that's why we notice these things. If you think about the amount of stimulus that your brain is exposed to on a daily basis, why do certain things really push your buttons? And it might be because there's still some stuff. It may be a memory, it may be an experience or an episode that you have stored somewhere in your brain that you just need to process and you just need to go and look at it. And if it's a repetitive thing, that there's a certain trait that keeps getting your attention, that's when I would be saying, okay, I need to look at that. What is it saying that I need to do that still need to work through? And you don't have to revisit and get re-traumatized or really open up that can of worms, but it's not going to stop niggling at you until you do. You're going to constantly attract that until you do. I'm pretty sure some spiritual beliefs or even religious scholars will say the same thing, that this is often why these things are getting our attention, because there is a deeper conscious drive for us to actually address it. It's challenging because it's frightening and potentially painful. Majority of the time that I do work with people that will then go to that place, there's so much healing, there's so much reflecting and processing. It's that it takes a while, but there's at the same time there's a huge amount of learning from that, and understanding and unpacking it, and that is so much more restorative than disassociating and scrolling through things that give you an instant feel-good factor. That's only going to last for a very short amount of time. It's like a drug, and you've now almost programmed your brain to become addicted to, I like this feeling when I disassociate from what I'm feeling, but as soon as that dissolves, that sort of dopamine hit starts to reduce, I have to do it again. So
very, very poor habits.
Yeah, it really is.
I have a low tolerance for stupidity. So that's why people are pushing my buttons. And some people play stupid to get extra help when they need it, and just ask me, I'll be happy to help you. So that's what's been pushing my buttons. Just say you need my help, I'll be happy to help you. Don't take it and run around the middle or talk to me like, I don't know what's going on. But sometimes I know, like I always look in, and when something's bothering me a lot, I totally get what you say. I do a lot of journaling for that, because I don't think, like, I've done a lot of work on the inside. Like when we were talking about people like liking what they see at their end of the life, so I'm big on self-actualization and all the psychologists and all that stuff. So, but if I can honestly say at this point in my life, when I look back at my life, I know that I did the best I could. I made a lot of mistakes, but I'm not unhappy with them. I know that I'm right where I need to be. And I'd probably make the same ones again, knowing what I know now, because I know I needed those tools, and they're learning. Someone told me today that you learn something from everyone, and they or we teach and we learn. Everyone teaches and learns. So people that came into my life that other people might say it was a bad thing, or this was a bad thing, I know that came in a time when I needed to have that lesson. So I'm okay with that. But I do a lot of journaling, because I find sometimes that I procrastinate a lot, Miss Nicky. And I think that comes from my childhood, because we were told that things had to be done like that. And as an adult, I'm like, well, I don't have to. I can wait. So I do kind of wait till the last minute for things. But
I think sometimes you need, stress is a normal healthy response. So if you need action, your body's designed to give you that surge of adrenaline to do things. If you leave everything to the last minute and then you have to do it under stress, whereas some people will say that's a good thing, but prolifically that's kind of like is exhausting to your nervous system, and it can become unhealthy for a lot of people to live like that. That's survival mode all the time. You wouldn't you don't see frontline workers working with that. They have to have downtime, you have to decompress and all of those things. But procrastination would be one of those responses I would recognize.
Yeah. So, but I mean, it's been like that since I was a child. I didn't like school, believe it or not. I was very good at it. So I found that I could read something before the test, because I had like an eidetic memory back then. Age has changed that. So I would study right before. I would always put things off to the last minute. So sometimes I still do that, but there's something about that project that I'm not all in on yet. So like sometimes I have to give a speech or something, and if I haven't found me in that speech where I could show up as myself, then that speech will sit on the shelf until I can really show up authentically. So things like that, not necessarily bad. And I don't let anything stress me out. I really don't. Um, you know, things used to really stress me out. And I've lost all my family. I see the damage, and I became very ill. I saw the damage that could be. So I asked myself, how important is it really? And I usually find out, you know, even though it seems like it's a crisis at that moment, that it's really not that important. And it's really not worth getting myself out of my own box about, you know what I mean?
I remember recently listening to someone telling the story of astronauts that go out into space. When they look back at Earth, all the small stuff, you know, the whole don't sweat the small stuff, all feels very insignificant when they're looking back. And a lot of them have those real epiphanies in their life. Wow, I've just spent such a long time worrying about that, and that. And really, in the big grand scheme of things, this is so tiny, you know.
Like even when I came online, you know, there was because we're healthcare professionals and we're used to being out in the field all the time. And then to all of a sudden be online, it was a very different scenario. Because when someone is physically in front of you, it's very easy to do that head to toe, where you really have to pull it out of them online. So, but we do, we're trained for that. But it was very different scenario because a lot of people were telling you how to show up and how to be, and you know, you need this and you need that. And I kind of said to myself, are you crazy? I've been doing this for 36 years. I don't need anything. I know that I can do this. But those words that come from outside of us, even though you think they don't affect you, and you think that you don't have that imposter syndrome or that thing, you think you're past that because you've done all the trauma. There's always going to be moments in your life that bring it up, and those are normal. And a lot of people, you know, think that they're just, you know, it's just them, and they're in not where they need to be. And they're exactly where they need to be. That's going to come up every time something new in their life happens, something new, a new marriage, new baby, you know, a new school, new job. So those are very normal responses, but a lot of people are trying to push down those feelings because it's fearful. Like you were saying, all of us do it. But the more that I feel that we talk about some of these things that are dysregulating our body, the easier it will be for other people to talk and get that help. Because there are a lot of dysregulated adults. I know that there were many years of my life that I was dysregulated, and I chose not to talk about it because it wasn't acceptable to talk about.
Yeah, I think the whole culture of mental health is backwards, because when we think of mental health, an example would be if you just went onto Google right now and Googled health and then looked at images, all you would see would be positive images: healthy food, exercise, connected feelings with families and friends. If you Google mental health and look at the images, you are going to see illness. There is a very different societal view of mental health, and I really wonder about that. And often I think when people you know, you see it all the time. I was just watching mindlessly scrolling through Facebook this morning, and I spotted a celebrity being interviewed, and he said that he took a break from social media or something because he could see that it was starting to impact his mental health, and that the journalists had jumped on that and were saying he was having a nervous breakdown, etc. Because there's always this sort of penalizing of mental health, but actually mental health is a positive thing as well. It's not illness. We don't look at health and instantly associate that with disease or illness. Well, why are we looking at mental health and thinking of depression and schizophrenia and anxiety disorders, etc., and dysregulation? It's a positive, but I think the messaging has been, I don't know how to word it. If we changed it to emotional health, perhaps that would sit better with a lot of people. But I think often when people start talking about mental health, they instantly go to that, oh yeah, we don't need to do that because it's not, we're not ill. We're not like seriously ill. But we don't talk about health the same way. So and health is psychological, it's mental, it's physical, it's spiritual, it's social, it's
All of
connected,
them.
it's the whole thing. So we're just siloing these things, and yeah, it's a oh, it's a conundrum. I don't know how
As
to address
nurses,
it.
but I think as nurses, to us, it's harder. I think it's harder to watch as a society because um, we are taught to treat the whole person. Look at your patient. What do you see? That's ingrained in us from day one, and we don't just treat the people, we treat their families because we know that what's happening with that child is impacting that mother, that grandmother, and the whole line. So we're taught that. So I think that we're maybe more aware of the full picture than most people. That's what has me out here trying to do this Fenix. I don't know if I'm going to be able to, I don't know if I'm going to be able to paint the picture, that the vision that I have, but I want people to see it's just different parts of the same person, and that you can't
Absolutely.
pick and choose which part you like. I like this, but I like that. I actually interviewed,
It's a full package. It's not just
yeah,
one or the other, it's the whole package.
I actually interviewed a delightful man, and he has schizophrenia, and I titled it "I'm Not My Disease" because
Mm,
there's so much more to him. So I was talking about mental health because it was Mental Health Awareness Month, and about how we need to talk more about it. People shouldn't have to hide what they're going through because they do need that support. So he liked what I was writing, and he reached out to me, and I said, let's talk about what's going on with you. So he's a college graduate. He's like a very he published, I don't know the right way to say this. He's an author, so that's the best way to say it. He's an author. He's gone on to publish a lot of different books on his own independently. He figured it out, and he's now supporting families of children or family members that have been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and how to navigate that system so they don't get lost in the shuffle, and they know how to live a productive life in society. So in my conversation with him, I asked him how it made him feel to be treated differently because of something he no more asked for than someone with hypertension. What is it like, with all these things that are on the news today about, well, in New York, I don't know what's going on in New Zealand, but there's a lot of crime in New York, and they're saying, well, he had a mental health issue. They keep bringing that up, like that's the reason they're doing it. There's good and bad in everyone. They don't have to have a mental health disorder to go on a crime spree, but that's something that they always highlight when that happens.
yeah.
And
That
I
just
just
reinforces the image that mental health is
is
a negative
bad
thing.
and dangerous,
Yeah.
and because people don't understand it. So the more that we hide behind that, the worse it's going to be. But also he brought to light that they are statistically more inclined to have harm done to them than to cause harm. And
Absolutely.
that was
Yeah.
when we first got together and we talked. And he said, wow, that's interesting. So I went back and I looked at it and I said, wow, it's almost twice as likely to happen to them than them committing. And I was just astonished by those numbers, because if you turn on the TV, they paint a very different picture. And there's a lot of children that, that I've dealt with, in my career, that have family members with schizophrenia, and because of the stigmatism, they're afraid even more so to talk about when they're having emotional feelings or depression or things, because they don't want to be labeled or put in that category.
Yeah.
So
When I
what's
was
the hope?
when I was just going to say, when I was when I was working in that infant parent baby arena through very early days, I found a lot of professional women who were not coming forward and saying, hey, I'm not doing okay, I've got some feelings that I'm struggling to work through. that may have been postnatal depression, that may have been a level of anxiety, it may have been a birth trauma, or attachment needs that were unmet when they were children. But there was a huge reluctance for them to come forward because of the stigma related to that and how that would impact them in their, when they go back to their professional lives. That's wrong on so many levels, you know. It's tragic, really. But I do believe that people who have got emotional they're dysregulated their emotions, they have a certain behaviors that have become, they have adapted certain behaviors to help them to survive all of those feelings, and some of those require emotional painkillers that cost a lot of money, which is, so crime is a way of attaining that level of emotional painkiller. For some people, they are sticking plasters on bullet wounds that they're doing all the time, but they are so vulnerable because they're so dysregulated and they're in survival mode all the time. They're such more likely to have things happen to them, and probably have done throughout their lives. It's very sad that that is how media, society do look at these situations, because ultimately they need help. They really need help when they're at that
really
point.
do, and it's just not available to them, you know. I know after COVID, public health was really trying to break down some of those stigmas, but we have a long way to go, you know.
Oh.
And sometimes some of these programs are just really putting a band-aid on it, and there's not enough manpower, you know, or tools to really give them what they need. So unfortunately, what are your hopes for the future? What's up next for us, Nikki? What can we
I'm
learn?
just going to leave this meeting right now at the point of I can't oh gosh. I have faith in human beings that we can overcome this, but at the same time, I am realistic to the challenges that I think we have with massive, on a bigger sort of larger service scale. But I think it has to be a full shift of how we address these issues. I think, we have to go right back to the beginning of life, because if we don't start this now, that 25-30-year trajectory is just, it's a downhill slope. I then also think we really, really need to immerse ourselves with looking at what's really going on here. Let's zoom out and really, really go down to the nuts and bolts and the foundation of what's going on with their regulation. If we don't invest in that, we're going to spend such a lot of money and time and effort really looking at symptom control. This is not preventing ill health. You know, I mean, really, if we were sensible, we'd invest into the prevention part of it, which is all of these things that I just said. Otherwise, we are going to
the management.
It's the ambulance for a lot of these services. It feels like the ambulance is the cheaper option, but it isn't. And I think as a society, it's spiraling. I think it's getting worse. I think COVID has definitely amplified that lack of resilience that I think we've had for a long time. And I think it's probably amplified the lackings and the deficits that we have at the moment. So it's a big job. I have an idea of what some of the answers are. I'm very low down in the pecking order as to making those big changes on a bigger level. But I think if we don't, I worry for the future. And not that I'm looking forward to retirement, but you know, it's getting worse.
But it might come sooner than we expect.
It might have to come sooner because of it's too hard. It's you know, I think anyone that's been in the position that we've been in, so we really know what's going on. I think we could make some significant changes, but I think there's a lot of obstacles to overcome first, and that is a destigmatizing and a really, really shift in the way that we address what's really at the cause, because I don't think we do that. What's at the root? I don't think we do that as systems, unfortunately. But I think that's what we have to do. Whether it happens or not, I don't know. I hope so.
Do you think that there's resources that like we could advocate for at the state and local, you know, the local, the state, you know, different levels of our government you know, because we have different things. And, you know, I mean, as nurses, we advocate on local and state levels all the time. You know what I mean? I think I'm saying the same thing, but my brain is starting to shut off because I'm tired. But I mean, there's
I
different
don't think we
levels.
have a big enough, I don't think we have a big enough voice. I don't think people really, I think people, majority of people have an idea, but I think for them it's in the too hard basket. So we'll just keep doing what we're doing because we maybe have statistically a few wins, but those wins are very small in the grand scheme of things. I don't know whether I don't know whether the right people are saying the right things. I don't know that they really deeply understand, and it might be because they've got their own stuff to sort out too, which they're not going to. So yeah, it's a big
Conundrum.
big can of worms that need opening, and that's, I think, the only way we're going to do it. But whether that happens or not, who knows? You can only do what you can do, and hope for the best. So I think that's where I'm at.
But yeah, I get that. But as people, we can make that change. So
Oh, for sure.
I have faith in that. And you know, She Rises Studios, you know, I love She Rises Studio. They're advocating for everything all the time. And we're trying to really bring a lot of awareness to a lot of different issues, you know. So I'm amongst a lot of amazing women that really do advocate for mental health. So the more of us that speak out about it, the better our chances are of getting that outcomes. Maybe we'll push somebody's buttons enough where they have to make a move.
I was just thinking when you were talking about, you know, living in New Zealand, we get a lot of natural and say, you know, around the world we get these natural disasters. But they always say be prepared and make sure you've got your emergency kits and you've got this and you've got that, particularly we live in quite an earthquake prone country. And because when it happens, you're going to be on your own. So maybe that's what every individual person has to look at it, is that we're in almost like we're in a state of emergency. So we actually really need to sort this out. We really need to go inside and help ourselves and do all of those things that, because I think if we're expecting services to be able to do that, I don't know that they have the resources or the funds or the capabilities or maybe even the inclination to do what needs to be doing. So maybe we need to do that. Maybe we need to take some control here and take the reins and go, okay, we're in a state of emergency mindset. Let's really do this. And if we all work together and try and do that, maybe that's the way from the bottom up. Maybe that's the way to do it. I
love that. Listen, it's been so great talking to you. She is off to work, believe it or not, guys. She's always working. That's what we do. So I'm so grateful that you came in to share your insights. I really love what you're doing. And I do believe that one person can make a difference. You might not think you are, but there's a lot of families out there that are glad that Nicky Cooper is coming in and helping them. So I thank you for showing up and for loving your job the way you do, because I see how much you put into it. And I know that you're like a single show out there. It's just you doing this. And, you know, there's definitely a need, but I think by them seeing the stuff that you're putting in place and the changes will kind of push their hand to say, you know what, this is a good thing. Look what it's doing. And maybe change will come about. But
yeah,
I'm going to say goodbye to our audience. I am going to leave Nicky's information if you want to get in touch with her, if this is something that you feel like you could use some help with, or you need some more information about where you can get these kind of service and stuff. By all means, please reach out. She loves to help. So this is Andra Annette and Nicky Cooper. If you like what you hear here, please like, subscribe, and ring that bell. And by all means, have a great day. Take care, guys.